Hello and welcome to another episode of Deprogrammed with Carrie Smith. This is still a relatively new channel. We've been around for a few months now. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has watched our videos, shared them, supported us, joined book club. Just very grateful for everything that's happened in the past few months. And I'm excited about my interview here today. So, this is someone that I've been wanting to talk to for a while. Like a lot of people in the past few years, since I left social justice ideology, I've made a lot of new friends online. And then some of those friends I've been lucky enough to meet in the real world. Not this lady yet, hopefully soon. But please welcome Suhaila Devidasi, who is a Vedic counselor and a pujari offering personalized rituals and spiritual counseling based in the Hindu Dharmic traditions. She has been working for about a decade in the nonprofit space and is currently working on creating her own Hindu temple. I know nothing about this. Please welcome Suhaila. How are you?
Hi, namaste and hello, Miss Carrie Smith. Thank you for having me on. I'm so glad we're finally getting to talk.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for being so patient with my numerous delays. And anyway,
It's
I'm so
okay.
glad once we got on the phone the first time, I said, "Oh, this is going to be a good interview because I am so outside of my element."
Mm.
So, why don't you start off by telling people just a little bit about who you are and what is a pujari? Just a little bit about
Yeah,
your background.
definitely. So what I do these days, a pujari, and a Vedic counselor. I come from the Hindu tradition. Not originally. I was born into like very fundamentalist evangelical Christian community and family environment, and we can talk about that later. But eventually, I found Hinduism, which just was like the most beautiful fit for me. It really, really worked for me, and it uh, helped me integrate a lot of the traumas that I went through, the religious trauma, and
Mhm.
also a lot of issues that I had about being an LGBT person because I'm a transsexual person as well. So Hinduism has it's a lot of people think it's a religion, but it's a whole civilizational ethos, and there's so many different parts and parcels of it, and so many tools available to help us live a really awesome, rich, prosperous life on a like mental level, psychological level, physical level, spiritual level. Like all the tools are there for a really holistic well-being. So I like to share the tools that I've used through like Ayurveda or traditional Indian medicine, um, techniques with yoga or breathing or mudras, using mantras or different words, setting up a dinacharya or like a Vedic morning routine. So I use what tools that I've learned over the years to help me grow in so many different ways to
Mhm.
help other people in their journey as well. And most of the people I work with actually aren't Indian or Hindu, are coming from an Eastern tradition. A lot of people I work with are like ex-Christians, ex-Jews, a lot of people that were like burned by the Abrahamic traditions, I guess you could say,
Mhm.
and a lot of LGBT people that um, felt like they're looking for a space that they can be spiritually, where they don't feel like they have to compromise their LGBT ness, I guess.
Mhm.
So I've worked with a lot of those people, and instead of them just kind of surrendering themselves to atheism, because I see a lot of that, instead of them doing that, I can see there is that desire for spirituality and spiritual traditions and ritual and all of these different things. So yeah, I love teaching people about Hinduism and giving them all of these different tools to help solve their problems.
And that's what a pujari is.
And a pujari is someone that specifically does certain rituals. Um, there are fire rituals that you do, and you chant various mantras and prayers, and you work with various deities or archetypes. And Yeah, there are many different kinds of Hindu rituals.
Okay.
I do personalized things, working with specific deities, working with people. So, for example, a deity I work with a lot is Ganesha. He's the elephant headed god.
That
Maybe you've seen a picture
I
of
have
him.
seen, yeah.
Yes, so I do a lot of work with Ganesha, especially with people first coming into Hinduism. And he's the god of obstacles and breaking obstacles, putting obstacles in your way. Um, and
Can
So
I
many people, yeah, ask.
so so I'm just gonna be the total dummy here.
No, please, it's totally
So,
okay.
which I think is better. It's better I didn't do a lot of research because I'd
Mm,
rather just ask you. So I actually had a friend who this is interesting. When I first started leaving social justice, and I had I don't think I realized I was in the middle of some kind of spiritual transformation. I just
mm,
knew I was leaving my old ideology, and the nature of the things I was posting online on social media was changing. I was asking more questions, and one of my friends, he was an acquaintance at the time, who I knew from New York, reached out to me, and he's Hindu, and he said
mhm.
he wanted to talk to me, and so we got on the phone, and he said, "You are undergoing, like, you're looking for God. That's what's happening."
Yeah.
And I thought, I was like, "No, I'm not looking for God. I'm just," and I thought he was very insightful about that. But I didn't ask him a lot about Hinduism, and so I'm going to ask
Mm.
some of those questions of you. So do
Ask
you?
away. I'm not
Okay,
offended by anything. LGBT or trans Hinduism, like, I'm not
okay.
offended. So ask anything.
So when you talk about Ganesha and these different deities, so in
Yes.
the Hindu tradition, do you believe um, that these are actual beings, like that Ganesha, when you called these deities archetypes as well?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
do you believe that these are mythical beings, or are they more um, symbols of something that can't be put into
Yeah.
words, or what?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Because you get a lot of, these days, especially, things have become so watered down. And to believe in a personal deity or personal entities like angels or gods or
Mhm.
beings of the beyond, that's become very unfashionable these days. People just want to believe in like an impersonal like force or like a something that exists out there. But
Mhm.
I believe the way I understand it is that the deities are multidimensional. So there's an aspect, for example, with Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth. So I believe that Lakshmi, she is the dimension that is prosperity, that is wealth, that is abundance, that is richness, and that ability to provide and be satiated.
Mhm.
That's Lakshmi, right? So I believe that she is like an independent intelligence, I guess you could say, but she is also like money and wealth of friends and wealth of spiritual knowledge and
Mhm.
wealth of food. And so it's like a multi-dimensional thing. Um, I don't know if that makes sense. So,
No, you're helping me understand better, you are.
okay.
Um, do you bel and so how many of these, you said you do a lot of work with, Ganesha, so what does that mean?
So, uh, a lot of the people that are coming and working with me for the first time and they're not familiar with Hinduism, I'll work with Ganesha with them because Ganesha is also known as like the Lord of Obstacles and or the Lord of New Beginnings and success and victory. So, like for Hindus, when you start like the day, or if you start a new journey, if you start a new job, a new relationship, anything new at the beginning, you always pray to Ganesh to make sure that you don't have any obstacles and that you'll work smarter, not harder, to get around what obstacles you do face to be able to achieve success. Um, and when I'm working with Ganesha, some people believe that he's just an archetype in like a dimension of psychology and the
Mhm.
dimension of all the things that he represents. Some people believe that he is indeed like an independent, intelligent, spiritual entity or spiritual force, which I also believe.
Mhm. Okay.
So depending, but the beautiful thing about Hinduism is like you don't really have to believe if it's real or not for it to benefit you,
Mhm.
because even if you don't believe Ganesh is like a real entity or whatever, if you listen to all the stories and the parables, the symbolism and the lessons are there regardless of you think if it's real or not, because the truth that the spiritual stories are touching on, it's not about historicity or if it actually happened or not. It's about all of these different parables and the symbolism within the stories to touch on truths that are beyond space and time. So a name for Hinduism is that Hinduism is actually what outsiders called Hinduism. So Hinduism, what it calls itself is Sanatana Dharma, which is just the eternal way or the eternal religion. So
The
it
eternal
touches
way. That's
much
interesting.
much like the Tao. So it touches on these aspects that are truth that are beyond space and time, that are applicable for anyone in any civilization. Of course, because of the language and the very colorful iconography, it's very confusing for a lot of people, but it's a very complex system for understanding yourself. Like, I kind of see working with different aspects of the deities as like having a mirror in front of you and seeing a different reflection of yourself. Because like Ganesha is a part of you, Krishna is a part of you, Lakshmi is a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with them and you're studying their stories and you're doing rituals to give energy to that, like what you worship, you become. So by worshiping Lakshmi and worshiping wealth and chanting about her and praying to her and thinking about all of her various qualities, you're imbibing that inner Lakshmi dimension within yourself as well. So you can, it depends on how you look at it. Like I said, I think that the devas or the deities, they're called the Devis or the Devatas. When in Sanskrit, it just means the being of light, the luminous light beings.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just described as like well-wishing entities for us. So sometimes I don't like to use the English terms and narratives about like gods and demons and all of that, because it's a very different system. And also a lot in the Western systems, you don't typically look at angels and gods and stuff as aspects of your own self. You know, there's a lot of different separation there.
What is the Hindu origin story in terms of, like, there's a creation story that I think most people, even if they're not Christian, could tell you the shorthand of the Christian creation story. What is the Hindu story?
Well, like the Hindu story of like creation, of how everything came about, or
yes.
like, okay, well, there's a couple different stories, but the big idea, the big picture is that time isn't linear. Time is cyclical, and time and space are just relegated to this material world. So there is a whole world of the transcendental spiritual world that is beyond this material plane, that is subject to time and space. So there is the way that it is described is very like quantum physics and stuff. If you can imagine, there's Vishnu, he's the god, he's asleep and he's lying on his big bed of snakes. And it says that with every exhale, that like breathing out from every pore of his body, there are innumerable cosmoses and universes and dimensions exiting throughout every pore of his body. And within every single pore of that body, there are reflections of the other dimensions in the other worlds. I wish I had my book with a picture. There's a very interesting picture when you see it, because it's very interesting the way that the dimensions are described. And that through that whole exhale, that's over many trillions and trillions and trillions of years. So there are many, the time scale in Hinduism is massive, on billions, trillions of years. So the whole of the cosmic manifestation, not just Earth, is in this expanding. And then eventually Vishnu will inhale and he'll breathe in. And then when he breathes in, all of the innumerable universes and cosmoses, they will all return to him and eventually return to God. And then like everything will be destroyed, transmuted, and then recreated again. And this is all happening over, again, like many trillions of our years, because like time for us is not something that is eternally existing, right? Our time scale is based off the earth and the sun and how we move and stuff. So time in other places is different.
Well, that's something I agree with that, because I mean, that's sort of in Christianity when people, well, sometimes, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of people who want to say, play a gotcha when they find out you're a Christian, or it's like, and they'll try and stump you or something. And sometimes those kind of gotcha questions, I'm like, I don't really like, there's a limit to my understanding as a human being. And science is ever progressing, but it doesn't, it can't explain, they can't explain consciousness yet. And so to me, it just makes sense that there's, time and space that you're talking about, that these are things that are here on Earth. And if there is a spiritual realm, which I believe there is, I believe that there's something, that transcends this material world. I believe in God. Our ideas of time and space don't apply to a God who is infinite. And it doesn't.
God is transcendent to these things. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. You said it better than I did.
Thanks.
My brain's not working well yet.
That's
I'm on my
okay.
first
That's
cup of
okay. We're getting
coffee.
warmed up.
Okay. So, let me get more into, and we can come back to some more specifics about, because I know I'm going to have more questions about
Mhm.
your faith. But one of the things that you said to me offline that was so interesting is,
Mm,
this show, Deprogrammed, I talked to a lot of people about my old belief system, which I do believe functioned for me like a religion, maybe a
mm.
very um, uh, inadequate religion. There were a lot of gaps. There were a lot of things it didn't
Yeah,
provide. But
yeah.
but it's sort of a false, in my opinion, a false kind of faith. And um, I think that Christianity is, I think, the antidote to woke. That's just my personal opinion. That's how
Mhm,
it's worked for me. It's not just a belief system, it's a behavior system, which
mm,
is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And anyway, on this show, I talked to people about my old ideology quite a bit. And you said to me offline that woke and Hinduism also do not walk well together. Can
No,
you
no,
can
not at
you
all.
talk about that a little bit?
Well, see, this is the thing about woke. People talk about, I was just listening to, I think, Douglas Murray yesterday or the day before, and he was talking about, on this newscast, the new religion of woke.
Mhm.
And they kept talking about new religion, new religion. In a way, I think it's not a new religion, it's just the most recent mutation of Marxism.
Yeah, I
So this
agree.
is it's just like saying, like Omicron isn't a whole new disease. It's one of the most recent mutations of COVID. So similarly, I think that what we're seeing woke now is the most recent mutation of Marxist ideology, Marxist critical consciousness. Yes. So um, one thing that I see a lot of people in the like anti-woke movement, I guess you could say, a lot of them just happen to be based in like the Judeo-Christian and more conservative kind of camp of things.
Mhm.
And they think that woke is like inherently anti-Christian and anti-Judeo-Christian, and it's like only out to destroy like white male patriarchy, all of that. But that's only partially true, because the Marxist ideology sets it up against the whole world.
I agree.
Whatever, yeah, whatever ideology, whatever culture, it sets itself up as an enemy against the whole world. And you can see this, how it's happened, how they have fought systematically against indigenous cultures across the world, which is another thing that people need to educate themselves with, because there's all these leftists and Marxists claiming to be friends and allies of indigenous people when they're just instilling and enforcing leftist colonialism. It's still
Mhm.
colonialism. It's just leftist Marxist colonialism, instead of supporting indigenous people in their own indigenous frameworks and paradigms and narratives, right?
Right.
So I tell people to look at especially what happened in two different countries, in China with the Cultural Revolution, because that obviously wasn't a white Christian, Judeo-Christian
Mhm.
nation, yet you can see through the Cultural Revolution how Marxism um, destroyed the entire traditional Chinese culture and set itself up against the old ideas, the four olds, the old ideas, old customs, old
Mhm.
habits, old practices, all those things. And it really decimated Chinese culture. And Chinese culture was one of the strongest civilizations on the planet for many thousands of years. One of the richest, most complex, very successful society. And even more so than China was India. And this is people know nothing about India, very little. We have
Yeah,
us,
so I know about how it decimated China during the Cultural Revolution, but you're right. I don't know a lot about Marxism in India.
yeah, and the thing about Hinduism is that it's the only classical ancient civilization that's still continuously living on today. Everybody else has been wiped out, converted, or genocided. Ancient Persians are gone. Ancient Egyptians are gone. All these great ancient civilizations, um, they've all been wiped out, and they only exist in people's memories and storybooks in the museums. It's not a living culture and ethos anymore, right? So in India, they've survived hundreds of years of Islamic invasions. And if you look at the Islamic history, how Islam spread, everywhere they went, they were very brutal. And within a generation or two, everyone was converted. Everybody, everywhere they went. Every culture, every tribe, every city, they were all digested into Islam, right? India is the only place, as far as I can tell, the only place on earth, the only civilization that has been able to withstand the onslaught of Islam, but not only the onslaught of Islam, but also the Christian missionaries, because for hundreds of years, billions of dollars have gone into the conversion industry and missionary mafias in India. And also, they've survived the Marxist onslaught. So you have the Muslims, or Islam and Christianity and Marxism, all attacking India for hundreds of years simultaneously, that have digested and destroyed every other indigenous culture on earth for the most part. Yet India is still here and going strong. In some ways, she's suffered a lot in the last 100 years, especially. But if you look on the big mass scale over the thousands of years, I think what Indian culture and civilization has to offer, it has so many solutions for our world today. And I think if you took those Dharmic values and a lot of the Vedic values with the technology and ability to create and spread wealth today, like, man, we could live on heaven on earth.
What do you mean by Dharmic values and Vedic values?
Well, a lot of the core values of Hinduism and Vedic culture is this idea, the supreme truth is Aham Brahmasmi, which is I am one with Brahman. And your true identity, your like essential constitution and positionality is as a soul or as an Atman. So you are beyond time, you are beyond space, you are beyond birth, you are beyond death. This Carrie and this Sahila and these bodies, these are temporary personalities. They came into the world and they'll go, but there's something beyond the real me, capital M-E, the capital self. Yes.
Something eternal. I believe that too.
Yes. And we call that the Atman, or sometimes translated as the soul. And another thing to understand is that in Hinduism, when you are introduced to yourself, it's as part and parcel of Brahman, part and parcel of Krishna. So the soul qualitatively is one and the same with God, one and the same with Krishna, just not qualitatively or quantitatively. So God is everywhere all the time, always. And we believe that nothing can exist in this material world unless it's reflected in something real in the spiritual world. Sometimes those reflections come through clearly and positively and in righteous, beautiful spiritual ways. And sometimes those reflections can come out in perverted ways and in ugly, what we would call like negative or bad ways. But anything that is in this existence, whether it's the people or the dogs or the trees or the material, everything in this material world, it has some sort of foundation or basis in the spiritual world to be reflected here in this temporary world. So that Brahman, that what we believe is, it's like the force or God. We believe, that's eternal and full of bliss and full of knowledge. And that us as Atmans, that we are that we are that part of us, not the ego, not the personality, not all of this temporary stuff that we've built up, not our identities. Yeah, not the flesh, not our identities, not our beliefs, but that eternal soul. And that's not just for us, but for all the various living entities throughout the whole cosmic manifestation. So not just humans, but dogs and, cats and the whales and the cows and all of the living entities throughout this whole cosmic manifestation. So it's not just thinking about here on Earth, but there's life that we can't even comprehend in other dimensions. And they might not have physical bodies like us, but they have a soul, maybe covered by an astral body or energetic body. But we believe, that all throughout this cosmos, there are so many living entities and all these eternal souls that are on so many various paths and journeys, having their own stories,
Yeah. So what would be like, what are the Dharmic values? And maybe I'm not using that word correctly.
I kind of went around that.
Oh, that's okay.
So
what are those and how are they? I'm also interested in how they don't. There's a great essay. I've had Samuel Say, I've talked to Samuel Say before, who's a Christian writer. He has a blog called Slow to Write. He wrote a great essay about, I think it was great for people who maybe aren't familiar with Christianity. Also, it was about how the tenets of the gospel, the values of the gospel and of Jesus are antithetical to woke and what woke teaches.
Yes.
To for me to look at Hinduism and say it, woke is antithetical to Hinduism, I don't know where to
Mm.
start because I don't know,
Well,
like, what are those Dharmic
the main thing
values?
is that you are the self, right? You are the
Okay.
transcendental self that is beyond the body. So you're not an American, you're not female, you're not white, you're not black, you're not human, you are the soul, right? So
Mm.
in all of the various scriptures, it says in so many ways that the learned transcendentalist, one who really has true spiritual vision, they see with equal vision, they just see God everywhere in all of the various living entities. And when you see God everywhere, then obviously you're not going to treat somebody very badly, whether it's the tree or the dog or the cow, you're going to treat them differently than if you just think this is some hunk of mass, with no feeling, no personality, no spirituality. And in wokeism, you are reduced to your collective identity, whether you identify with it or not. So I cannot go beyond my transness. I can't go beyond, like a black person can't go beyond their blackness. Like, you're always going to be your collective identity. And
Yes.
you'll never be able to transcend that. And I hate that because in woke, like in one of my last workplaces, they were literally asking me to look at and perceive and treat black people and trans people differently because they're poor and undereducated. And I'm like, that's so racist. But anyways, as it relates to Hinduism, it's like, but I have the religious and spiritual prerogative to see all of the living entities with equal vision and to see God's presence and the presence of divinity everywhere. So what you want me to
Yeah.
do as a woke person is to not go to the core, but to focus on all of this extraneous, outside layer,
Meaningless stuff.
temporary, superficial stuff. Yes. And I think, no, I think most of the issues we face are solved better if we go, even if you want to be more agnostic or secular, go the way of Martin Luther King, treat people by their character. That's very
Yeah.
good. I go a little bit further. Krishna says go even further, to see people, as the soul. So you have to see that transcendental self within that other person, because that's ultimately part and parcel of Krishna in them and in you. Like, there's oneness shared between you, even though they're
Yeah.
separate bodies, right?
Y
The
you
oneness and
know
the divinity of God is present there. So you should respect that, see that, praise that, glorify that, not cover it all up with, oh, you're old and transgender and handicap and Samoan and like all this like
Yes.
different various lists of things.
That's
I
not your
just,
identity. Yes.
right.
Okay, so I think one thing that we have in common is that yeah, I came to understand through this journey I've been on is that um our identity, because I was in woke for so long, and
Hmm.
identity is so important to them, and what they mean by identity is what race you are, what sex you are, if you're trans, if
Yes,
you're,
yes,
fat, if you have a mental health issue, and
yes.
um it's all these immutable characteristics, or these very meaningless things, I
Yeah,
think, in the long run, and that's not
yeah,
your identity. My identity is, as you were talking about, my identity is something eternal. It's not
yeah.
this
And it's,
body, this shell that I'm in, or
yeah,
what circumstance I was born
mhm,
into here on earth.
yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think in my spiritual conspiratorial mind, like, I think Marxism and woke ideology is literally like a demonic conspiracy. It's spiritual warfare. And it's so
Yeah.
funny that like even now they come out and say it's critical consciousness. Because like what we try and do, especially as devotees of Krishna, there's so many kinds of Hindus, but the idea is that you want to practice and imbibe God consciousness or Krishna consciousness, not critical consciousness. You know,
Mm.
I'm here for the Krishna consciousness, to see the presence of Krishna everywhere. And like, the whole concept of Krishna is so lovely and sweet and fantastic. And when you try and find Krishna, that sweetness in everywhere, instead of looking for an occurrence of white supremacy or racism or oppression or prejudice, like, I don't know, like, if what's that saying, like a hammer is always going to go look for nails or
Yeah.
something like that,
When all
so
you've
it's
got is
like,
a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So these people, every interaction, it's not if racism happened, if white supremacy happened, if Islamophobia happened. It's like, how did anti-racist or how did racism happen here? How did white
Yes.
supremacy manifest itself? Not if. So they train people specifically to engage only in lower base material consciousness. They can't be risen to like transcendental vision. So
Mm.
I think that this is a spiritual trick to keep people ignorant and just engage them in like animal material consciousness, you know?
I completely agree with that. So is woke trying to is there an encroachment on Hinduism? Like
Oh,
in the Christian
yes.
church there is. They're trying to come into the
Oh,
churches and
yes.
upside down everything.
Yes. In America, um, it's changed over the last decade a lot because if you go back far enough, like people didn't really know enough, didn't know anything about Hindus or Indian people, maybe an assumption here or there, but because they were different and they're a racial and religious minority, they're pretty high up on the like victim oppression
Mm. On the
totem
woke
pole,
scale.
right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. However, what we've been seeing in the United States and in Europe, a lot of the Western world, is that a lot of the woke movements have been more supportive of Islam and Muslims. And there's like this joint like allyship of Islam and leftism that's like really bizarre. And a lot of the Islamic activists that are working with leftists, they spread all of this propaganda that India is this fascist nationalist country and that Hindus are terrible people and they hate Muslims and they want to like commit genocide against Muslims in India, and they present Hindus as like these horrible backwards people. And to give an example of how things have changed. Quick backstory. So one of the issues in India is that, like I said, for hundreds of years, there was Islamic conquest and rule. And it was really hard for the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jains because Islam is very iconoclastic and very monotheistic and my way is the only way. It was really rough. Now, there's a part of India called Kashmir. And for many hundreds of years, Islam has been working to wipe out all of the Kashmiri Pundits, or like the indigenous priestly Hindu population there. And over the years, there have been various exoduses of Hindus being forced to leave because their Muslim neighbors have given them the option of convert, leave, or die. And it's been a horrible, horrible, bloody genocide, really ridiculous. And nobody really talks about it. But years ago, I found this out when I was working in Oregon. The state, I think it was the state legislature of Oregon, was one of the only places in the world to recognize the Kashmiri genocide back in the 90s, I think it was. And they
Oh, wow.
actually passed like a thing recognizing that. So like Oregon used to be really woke and liberal and all of those things, like, but like more sane and understanding the issue. Like, oh, the Hindus are clearly being genocided against. This is a religious war.
Right.
And people are being killed just because they're Hindu. But now the leftists and Islamists work so much together in Oregon and New York and places in LA. You have groups chanting Azadi or like freedom for the Muslims to rule over Kashmir. And they're saying that the Muslims are the ones that are being killed and genocided against by fascist Hindus, when it's the complete opposite. So it's
Wow.
basically like people saying, oh, the poor Nazis, those Jews just keep taking advantage of them and ruining their culture and destroying them and being so fascist, trying to genocide them. But it's the complete opposite. So,
Why do you think woke is you know what I'm thinking? I would love to have you on a show with one of my regular co-hosts on Monday shows is Cameron Pasha, who's
mm,
Islamic.
mm,
I think you guys would have a really interesting conversation. He has his own criticisms of Western Muslims. Why
mhm.
do you think that is that there's this sort of strange bedfellow relationship that's developed in the West between
Well,
woke and Islam in the West?
I think the spiritual undercurrents are the same, even though the outer manifestations of the ideologies and the religions are different. The spiritual undercurrent is the same. So whether people are conscious of it or not, I think they feel a kindred spirit kind of. Um, a lot of the leftists and Muslims work with each other because most of the leftist Muslims in the Western world are women and also hijabis and feminists, which is very confusing.
That is
Um,
confusing.
yeah, and a lot of them will support like LGBT rights and stuff, but it's like really bizarre because like you can't get any imams or mosques, you can't get any actual like religious authorities or people with any theological understanding to support you. It's just like these really random young feminist Muslim women for the most part. But I think that they both are very monotheistic, and I think a lot of the monotheistic traditions lead towards, may or not, if not lead towards, very easily the trap is there for you to fall into egoism and narcissism. And I think that is, if you take like a severely fundamentalist Islamic person or a severely woke person, maybe not the woke of today, but like the woke during like the Chinese Revolution, Cultural Revolution, like their behaviors are the same, you know. The purity spirals are the same. People start, even when you get rid of everyone else and the outsiders, now you start fighting against each other in inner factions, and then you just spiral until someone could have been a really pure, great person in the ideology 5 years ago, but now it's like, oh, they're not. Now they're considered a traitor, and they're not like committed enough, and people just, it's a self-destructive system.
You're making me think of, I was just reading an article about the Spanish Inquisition, and one of the things that struck me was how Christianity was being used for the totalitarian state, and how a lot of what they were describing that was going on reminded me of today, although taken to the extreme. But they were talking about self-censorship, so there was this real movement to purge non-believers or false believers, false converts, Jewish people who had converted to Christianity in the late 1400s, 1500, in the 1500s, and they were looking for any evidence that they still held on to any Jewish traditions. And so people were turning in family members, all of that same kind of stuff that you see in totalitarian societies.
They even had Catholic Inquisition in India, in Goa. They had Inquisition up till the 1800s. So same story in Goa, when the Portuguese and the Catholics were there torturing people. You have to change your name. You can't speak your native language. You can't wear your native clothes. The way that you eat rice has to be in a Portuguese Christian way instead of eating rice in a Hindu way. So
what is that?
I think you weren't allowed to put butter, and you had to put salt instead, or something like that. I can't remember. But it was people so regulated to that extent, you know. And even today, it's very unfortunate, but a lot of the really evangelical missionaries that are in India, to prove to them that they've like actually converted, they'll make people take their pictures of their gods or their murtis, their statues, and like spit on them or smash them and break them, and like make them show like you are committed now to this new way of life, and you've completely cut off with your old history.
There's sort of evidence of that.
Wow. And that kind of goes back to like the different cult values in Hinduism and woke, is that woke and all of the Abrahamic religions, as far as I'm concerned, because they're so monotheistic, there's no room for pluralism, right? Even they, like in Christianity, it's only until fairly recently, I think, that like the Catholics and the Protestants have been able to get along. You know, how many years were they killing and destroying each other? And in Islam, you have the Sufis and you have the Shias. And how long have they been slaughtering each other and fighting for dominance? But in Hinduism, you have this idea of pluralism that's so open, and like, you worship this God, okay, you worship that God, okay. We're all part and parcel of God. So like, you're on a path towards self-realization. So that's going to be individualized and look different for everyone else, dependent on your natural inborn tendencies and your natural inborn nature. So in India, people portray India and Hindu civilization as very backwards and casteist and discriminatory and oppressive. But India was actually, talking about Inquisition and the Jews, the only place in the world where the Jews could go and they weren't genocided against or attacked or bothered. They were just free to be. And I think one of the first things that the Israeli parliament or government did when they formed Israel, I don't know if they wrote like an actual act or something, but they came out and they were like, thank you, India, because in all of our history of the Jewish people, you were the only ones to give us like refuge and a home, and we're peaceful and we're trying to like destroy us, you know? So not only the Jews, but also when the Zoroastrians of the Persian culture, when all of Islam was coming into Persia, and killing all of the Zoroastrians, they fled to India. And they, all of the Zoroastrians, they were allowed to take refuge in India, and they lived very nicely, very peacefully. And some of the oldest existing Christians even are in India, the Thomas Christians. So there's so many hundreds, if not thousands, of sampradayas and mats, or like groups, denominations of Hinduism. So many groups of Buddhists and Jains and Sikhs, and even Christians. Like the Hindu social system just allows for that fluidity and the flexibility of everyone to get along very well.
So what I'm hearing you saying, let me think about this for a second.
Okay.
so one of the similarities that I saw in that article about the Spanish Inquisition, in that case, in that point in history, it was tyrants in a totalitarian state using Christianity as their method, and kind of, I think, perverting and abusing and exploiting Christianity to terrorize people, dominate people, oppress people. And what I see, and people were self-censoring and everything to fit in and conform. And what I see happening now in the West is a totalitarian state using woke to terrorize people, to get people to fall in line, to people are afraid, they self-censor because woke is being used by the state. So I've always thought, or what I've not always, in the past couple of years, I've started thinking, I guess that any belief system can be used, can be perverted, that human nature, the dark side of human nature, is going to come out in some people, and that you can use any system of belief. You can try and turn it upside down and use it as a hammer to oppress someone else. Are you saying that Hinduism is different from from other belief systems because it is pluralistic, and you think it's more immune to that?
I think so. Not completely immune, but much more immune. So, I think it has mostly to do with the personality and the nature of the person. Because if you have someone who is very, what's the word? It's very easy for you to fall into egoism and like narcissism, and those, you're like more vulnerable and more prone to those things. I think that the monotheistic traditions will feed those negative psychological spaces, and tendencies. And it kind of creates like the worst in what we see in like the Old Testament God, this smiting, and this is my only way. There's one way to do it. There's one God. And like, if anyone that dissents, you kick them out, or they're outcasts, or you kill them, so I definitely see a lot of that now with the woke being forced on everyone, for sure.
Do Hindus go out and try to convert people?
No. You have Hare Krishna people, or their ISKCON, or International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They evangelize. They will go out and like try and distribute books. Most people know them. They have shaved heads, orange robes, and they danced in the airports.
I know.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna gave me. Oh no. Well, yeah, Hare Krishna gave me a book to read once. Anyway, that's all.
So that's probably the closest tradition that I align with is Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But I'm not a part of ISKCON, or the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But they will go out and distribute books and share, but there's no compulsion. There's no even concept of like, go out and convert other people to our ways. Like, it doesn't even occur to people, because everybody has their own Dharma. And everybody has the ways. Everybody's kind of looked to carry on the traditions of their ancestors too. The way of your parents and your forefathers and your ancestors is pretty important. So if you want to convert, that's okay. But like, to go out and ask someone to change everything about them is not a Hindu thing. It's more of like, hey, there's like this philosophy. If you want to know about it, like, we'll teach you about it. But there's no such thing as conversion per se.
What do you mean everyone has their own Dharma? What does that mean?
Well, everyone has their own duty. Everyone has their own, duty. So Krishna talks about when everybody has their own right to do what they were incarnated here in this time and space to do. They have to do that, right? So some of us were born to be painters and to be artists, and like to put ourselves into that, and Some people, that is that person's dharma, you know. Other people, it's their dharma to sing and to be in music, and their whole being is just about singing. So it's like the dharma of water is like to be wet, the dharma of fire is to be hot, and the dharma of people will manifest in different ways for them to lead, and those, that action, those duties, and that will lead you on a path towards self-realization. So if painting and art and all of that is your dharma, like you doing that will help you understand yourself and your own system of unfolding and unblossoming, right? In Krishna and Bhagavad Gita, it's one of our most important scripts. Krishna says, like, it's better for you to do your own dharma and even fail at it than to do somebody else's dharma and succeed at it. Because it's not your dharma. You're not here to do that. That's not your space. That's not what you're here for. So there's this idea that, yes, like everybody has their own duty and they have to do that. The Swadharma, or the ultimate dharma, the ultimate responsibility, is to serve God, to serve and to love God. Before anything else, you know, that is the supreme dharma of everyone, to know and to serve God. And then we all do that through various ways. Some of us will do it through, like I said, music. Some of us will do it through farming and gardening. Some of us will do it through deity worship and pujas and rituals. People will do it through being a doctor or a nurse or healing people through those means. So dharma is like your inborn nature, like what you're here to do and to accomplish and to explore. Mm-hmm.
And how do Hindus explain people who are living in either depression, resentment, evil, like, you know, just evil behavior, on a scale of just all the different kinds of darkness, whether it's their own personal torment and being in a very low place with no purpose or meaning that they can, that at least that they can see at the time, all the way to someone who's living in evil and hurting people. Like, how is that explained?
To the degree that you're more entangled in material consciousness, you will suffer more. So the more you're in critical consciousness, the more you're focusing on all the material things, that, because everything in this world, some people say, oh, it's not real. It's not that it's not real. It's just we don't consider it concrete real, because everything in this material world is changing, right? Nothing stays the same forever. Even the pyramids over thousands and thousands of years, they're still there, but they've changed, they've morphed, they've deteriorated, right? So, the more you entangle yourself in material consciousness, the more you're going to be angry, the more you're going to quarrel, the more you're going to be depressed. And that will, and also the kind of lifestyle that you live is also important. So your feng shui, the setting up of your house and where you live and how things are placed in your home can affect you. Your diet is a huge thing. And whether the different exercises you do or don't do, you know, the emotional and mental hygiene that you partake in or don't partake in, you know. So there's multi-dimensional aspects to why someone might be depressed and angry and resentful. And generally, like I was saying, Hinduism sees time as cycles, right? So the age that we're in right now is considered the Iron Age, or the Age of Kali. And this is like the lowest, most degraded, like base age, like not so great.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're like a long time ago, there was like the golden age where people were like very enlightened and everything was great. And then you have like, you're moving through these different stages. And now we're in the Iron Age, and this is most difficult. And it's known as the Age of Quarrel. So when you see everybody arguing and quarreling, like we're in the Age of Kali. That is the predominating nature, not everybody, but the predominating theme is like very low animalistic consciousness.
So when's that going to end? Because I'd like to.
Depends. It depends on who you ask. There's a couple different answers. Some people, they've come up with their mathematical, astrological calculations, and it's like from a couple thousand more years to hundreds of thousands of more years. But from the Krishna conscious perspective, if you're Krishna consciousness and you're a God conscious person, you're not dealing with the material world. You're not dealing with time and space. So, and if you're a God conscious person, you carry Krishna and God within you. You're like a walking pilgrimage, and everyone that like comes in contact with you will benefit from that, whether they know it or not, you know, because of the energy that you carry. And yeah. Does that make sense?
That does well, that makes sense to me, and that's actually because that's sort of similar to how I think of God and the Holy Spirit and Christianity. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't I don't go out and try and convert people, mostly because I don't think I have that power anyway. I think that's a
Yeah,
Holy
yeah.
Spirit thing, and that's not me. But I do believe that when God is living in you, that people can tell.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
change and
Yeah.
your behavior changes and
Yes.
it's it's not even of your own conscious doing entirely. It's just sort of
Right.
because you've made this commitment and this belief and you've asked in the Christian belief system is you've asked the Holy Spirit to come and dwell inside of you,
Mhm. Mhm.
and there are going to be differences. That doesn't mean that you're not going to sin
Mhm.
or stumble or struggle, because we're still here in these on this
Mhm.
realm with this flesh, in this
Mhm.
body,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we are human and we have human temptations and failings and all of those things. But I think there's a marked difference when a person is animated by truth, beauty, joy, versus when they're animated by the opposite, resentment.
Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
we have to be careful because it's Age of Kali, so that's all over the place.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This is so interesting. Thank you for taking the time to answer all of
Yeah,
my kind of
no
dumb
problem.
questions. I am going to ask you about, since you mentioned at the beginning, you've also shared some interesting opinions about being trans
Mhm.
and living in this woke age where
Yeah.
there are oftentimes this is something that is in the mainstream debate now in the culture wars, and
Yeah.
oftentimes there are people who are speaking for trans people,
Mm.
and you're one of many trans people I know who are saying, "Hey, don't speak for me." Do you want to share some of your thoughts on that? Like,
Oh, yes. I don't even know where
today.
to begin. That's a long story, Miss Carrie Smith. Well, in relation to Hinduism, I can
Okay.
say that my understanding of myself in general is informed by what I've been presented in the Hindu Dharmic tradition, but also how I understand like gender and sexuality and those sort of things are coming from Vedic tradition as well. So I don't think like the conservative right or the conservative left are correct, or either it's just not mine. It's not the way that I see myself and I see gender and sexuality. So within Hinduism, like I said, it's a whole civilizational ethos. So there's all sort of pieces of this pie, different kinds of knowledge and study. And in the medical texts, there's a whole section on embryological development. And it actually talks about why someone is a third gender. So it says there's male, and then there's female, and then there's third gender. And it goes through all of these reasons why someone would be born a male or a female or a third gender. So in the medical text, also in the astrological texts, the placement of various planets might affect someone's gender or sexual orientation, those sort of things. The sexual position of the parents, all so many different things are taken into account with like, why are there third gender people? Past life impressions. So there's all these various aspects that talk about LGBT people all the way back then, thousands of years
And
ago.
this is in Hinduism.
Yeah, this is in Hinduism. And that text, I think that was called the Sushruta Samhita, which is a very famous old Ayurvedic medical text. And I think some of the first surgical medical texts to enter Europe were from India. They're Indian
Oh,
texts on
wow.
plastic surgery. Because they even have a whole section on surgery thousands of years ago, cataract surgery, nose jobs, so many things. Very interesting. Um,
Crazy.
yeah, and it's very interesting. Yeah. So I guess my narrative on how I understand gender and all of that, like I said, it's based in Hinduism. It's not coming from a leftist position or conservative or Christian, Republican, whatever position. So I'm kind of an outlier because it's like, well, I don't support you. And then whoever that is, they think, oh, well, you must support them. And I'm like, well, I don't support them either. I'm a Hindu
I
and I have my own belief on
I
things, you
know a
know?
little bit of that. I think anybody who doesn't just fall in line with a type of tribalism right now is
Yeah.
sort of face that where you're being called both things by both. I think in the past month I've been called a turf, and a trans-enabling Pharisee.
That was my favorite. I remember when you told me that, a trans-enabling Pharisee.
So
Lord.
I'm like, well, which is it? Anyway, so
Yeah.
you don't really,
So
you're sort of an outlier.
yes, and I don't like when people push their ways on me. I don't care what it is. Religion, philosophy, politics, like
Yes.
diet, like just let me be. Like I'm a very easy-go-lucky person, you know. Most of the time just like please kindly like leave me the fuck alone and we'll be good, you know. But if you start trying to push stuff on me, like we're gonna have an issue.
Oh, honey.
Um so
Yes.
yeah. And like I said, and why I don't like being portrayed by a lot of the trans activists is, well, one, I think 99% of them aren't even trans. Uh,
They're not.
which sounds weird because how do people understand that, right? Because my understanding of trans is like the old version of like transsexual is someone that like has gender dysphoria and transitions and like not that they even want and try to make changes to transition, but you can't help it but to transition, you know. And at my last place of work, it was so crazy because we had a whole month of mandatory BLM trainings and all of this different stuff, and like
Oh,
every day we had videos and lectures and articles we had to read, and then we had 2 1 hour 45-minute sessions a week where we had to break out in groups and talk about white supremacy and racism and all of these things. So one of
oh,
those was a gender and sexuality like teach-in or whatever. And the presenter, you know, I'm assuming was just like a regular gay guy, like maybe like a twink, you know, like he was wearing like men's clothes, like a tank top, like kind of messy hair and like uh scruff, haven't shaved a few days, like
I'm
male
picturing
in
him
every
well.
way that I could imagine. Halfway through the presentation, here they are talking about that they're a transgender Muslim woman, a brown transgender woman of trans experience or something like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like for real, like you're gonna come up in here looking like a total dude and like no makeup, you're like, you've got a beard and like,
Wait, he said he was a brown
yeah,
trans.
yeah, woman, a brown Muslim woman of transgender
What?
experience.
And he wasn't joking?
No, no. And that's the thing in Oregon, people take it so seriously, Carrie Smith. Um, I had to walk away from the activist and nonprofit social work world because it's all been overtaken by all of
Yes.
these woke crazies. And again, all of these trans people that like they are open about not having dysphoria. And some of them say to transition is rooted in white supremacist ideology because you're only hankering and like going after cis heteronormative white values and ideas of what it is to be a man or woman. So even if now we have that school, we have one school of trans that is like pushing the kids to transition as young as possible. And then we have another extreme school that says like to even transition is transphobic.
I've seen this.
Um,
What I've seen this other extreme school. I'm going to
yeah,
pause here for a second because some viewers may not be familiar with this.
yeah, yeah,
So yes, there are the super woke people who are saying, as you said, we need to transition kids as soon as possible so they have the greatest chance. And they often use suicide and say if
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't, they're likely to commit suicide. And we have to give these surgeries and these medical interventions to children who
yeah,
in my opinion, not just my opinion, they are not capable of making these permanent medical decisions
yeah,
when they're young, when they're
yeah,
that young.
yeah,
Um, but then you have this other extreme kind of woke person who is now saying, I've seen this online, this is what you're talking about, I think,
yes,
where they
yes,
say, we shouldn't have to physically transition. We just are. So I can look fully masculine. I was born a man. I have a penis. And I am a woman just because I say I am. And
yep,
I will not transition or change anything, but I want to be called and seen as a woman. And how
hmm.
dare you not do that? Because
And here's
women
the
can
kicker,
have a penis.
Carrie.
What?
Here's the kicker. If you criticize or question them, then you're a misogynist.
Yeah, because they're not a woman.
See how crazy it's become? The
Yes.
nonsense and tomfoolery.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
crazy. So yeah, I would come up against so many of these trans activists because I was a trans activist and
Mhm.
I don't like to say that anymore. I'm cautious when I say that because people have so many
Yeah.
ideas, you know, and it's like, we do need trans activism because it's like a lot of the people I was working with, like homeless people or young girls, fundraising for young girls that have been trafficked into sex work, or like homeless veterans. I've worked with so many different people, so many different demographics and stuff. So many people need help. But like the only people that are allowed to do the helping now are the ones that ascribe to the Marxist view of everything. And now I have all of these, yeah, you know, like not trans people telling me how to trans. Um,
Yes.
and and for a lot of them, their transition, which might only consist of a little bit of a wardrobe change, some makeup, and like shaving half their head, like is more based in political ideology than any
Yes.
sort of dysphoria, you
Yes.
know? So it's unfortunate. I understand why people think to be trans is to be a Marxist or a crazed communist person. I understand why they have that assumption, but it's unfortunate because we're all not that way. You know, like my being trans had nothing to do with ideology or politics or using my body as a canvas to fight against the patriarchy, or like none
Yeah.
of that. You know, it was just for me from a very young age, as young as I could remember. It was like the whole trope, like stuck in the wrong body. You know, that's how I felt from the youngest age that I could imagine. And there
Do you
has,
think that there's a social contagion going on because now that it's exploded into the
oh
mainstream?
yes,
See, yes,
of course,
yes,
yes, yes. And I saw this happen before this happened with trans. It's happened with identifying with mental illnesses,
yes.
or psychological conditions. I will never forget the last time I went to a big trans event. I was invited to a national trans activist conference thing. And it was one of the most bizarre things. Here I am thinking, like, oh, I'm going to meet some really cool trans leaders that are like doing good work in the community. And like almost all of them were like crazy communists. And most of them were the younger female to males that claim to be men or boys, BOI,
Mhm.
stuff like that. And, you know, no intention of ever transitioning, or anything like that. But yeah, they were really crazy. Where was I going with that?
Well, the
Um,
social contagion.
oh,
So
the social contagion. Yeah. So when they would introduce themselves, hi, my name is Sahila. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have bipolar and depression, and I tried to kill myself 2 months ago, and I also have schizophrenia, and I'm working with a therapist right now, and blah 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 blah, and like so many people introduce themselves like it's cringy enough when it's the pronouns outside of LGBT spaces. If you're in an LGBT space and in the midst of transition, I can understand that. But if you're in a non-LGBT space and then you're just telling someone your pronouns, it's cringy enough. And then you go, oh, I have like, I'm neurodiverse and I have autism and depression. And like,
mhm.
literally, there was one of the people there, like, yeah, I tried to kill myself 2 months ago. And like, I'm still pretty suicidal now. So,
And that's
like,
part of their identity now.
it is. That's a part of
Yes.
their identity. So if you like that person, for example, they it's funny enough, they actually did a presentation on Islam and how Islam is so great for LGBT people.
What?
Uh yes, yes. Again, the joint relationship
Yeah.
there of Islam and LGBT. Bizarre. And a lot of her examples that she was using like pictures of Hindus in India and like Hindu tolerance of LGBT people, saying it's Muslim or is Islamic.
She didn't even know.
She didn't even know because she was Pakistani, and she only went off what like her mom told her. And Pakistan used to be a part of India, and they have a lot of similarities with the third gender culture, but the acceptance and tolerance of LGBT people in Islam and especially in Pakistan is due to the underlying old Hindu tendencies, not Islamic ones, in my
Oh.
opinion.
Yeah.
Because there can be no LGBT people in Sunni Islam, at least in Shia. This would be good to talk with your friend Cameron
You guys
because
would probably disagree on a lot, but also
yeah,
agree on some interesting things.
in Iran, they trans the gay away. That's why they don't have any gay people, because you can't be gay. It's illegal in Iran. So you are forced to transition by the government, and the government pays for it and everything for you to transition because you're not allowed to be gay. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And so that's
It's
why you
pretty
have more.
horrifying, right?
Yeah, because that's what they're sort of saying now about, one of the criticisms of woke ideology transing all
Mhm.
these kids or trying to trans all these kids immediately is that, so isn't that kind of working like a kind of conversion therapy where you're saying,
Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
okay, you must convert to the other sex now or try to so that,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
it
see that I see that there a lot, and it disturbs me because I did a lot of public education against conversion therapy because I almost ended up in conversion
oh,
therapy
wow.
as a kid, which would have been such a nightmare. And I've met people that have gone through it, and it's terrible. So obviously, I don't support that, but I don't support what the left is doing, which is like reverse
Yeah.
conversion therapy. Yeah, because you're still instilling some sort of something into the child where LGBT a few years ago, maybe 5, 10 years ago, is more about like just let your kid be. You don't need a label.
Mhm.
Like if your son likes playing with Barbies, okay. If like your girl likes playing with trucks and baseball, like okay, Tom girl, maybe a little bit butch here and there, but you don't have to worry about it. Now, oh my gosh, like a boy likes pink. Oh my gosh, I must have a transgender child, or a girl that's just a tomboy and doesn't adhere to like 1950s like WASP standards of what a woman should be. They're like, oh, she must be a transgender man, and it's like, I, yeah, I think it's easier for people to process in some ways having a trans kid because it's just one or the other instead of having like a gay kid because then they have to process like homosexuality is different than if yeah, like if you have a trans kid, unless they're gay, they're gonna be in a heterosexual relationship,
What
right?
they're calling a heterosexual
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah. I don't know what you would even call it, but
Yeah.
it's
It
different. It's
and then
different.
the mind gets so twisted and bent around where you just see these incredible I've mentioned this before, but I'm in a lot of these parents groups for parents supporting other parents of trans kids just to see what they're talking about and what they're pushing, and it really is an orthodoxy. And I've seen
Yeah.
there was one mother whose daughter just became a boy, decided to start
Mhm.
identifying as a boy, and her daughter's she was now calling her daughter her son. But her
Uh-huh.
daughter's boyfriend broke up with her, and she said something like to the group, um, she thinks it's because of, his mom found out that she was like calling him a he. See, it gets so confusing. She was saying because, he's a boy, because he's transitioned. And she
Mm.
said, "Do you think that this woman's son doesn't know that her son is gay?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? He was dating your daughter, a girl. Your
Yeah.
daughter decided she wanted to identify as a boy. The boyfriend broke up with her, and now you're saying it's because he hasn't accepted that he's gay." It's like it doesn't,
No,
yeah.
no. The
It
mental gymnastics these
Yeah.
people go through, it's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
I used to go to like LGBT support groups, and then there's like PFLAG, Parents and Friends of
Yep.
Lesbians and Gays. Like when I was first coming out as a kid, these were really great resources and like actually really helpful and was more like the Trevor Project, like it gets better. And there wasn't like a whole ideology behind it. It was more like you're normal, it's okay, we're gonna work through this. And like
It was before social justice
yes,
cannibalized it. That's really what's
yes,
happened, is
yes.
it's just kind of come
After
into
gay
every
marriage,
movement.
I saw a huge shift from not only in the LGBT, but leftism and the Democrat Party in general. And I think that's when the communist takeover happened. And
Yeah.
whatever is left of the Democratic Party is an empty shell that's just filled with Marxism.
Yeah.
So it's
I
just
completely
parading as the
agree.
Democrat Party, but it's straight up Marxism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
it's
what are your
sad.
fears about one of the things you've expressed in the past is, which I think is a very real fear,
Mhm.
is about what is going to happen now that so the way I view it is there've always been a, a fraction of a percent of
Mhm.
people who've
Yeah.
experienced gender dysphoria said they've always felt, like you said, always felt like they were born in the wrong body. What's happened now is that there's this social contagion. It's exploded. It's become
Mhm.
incorporated into social justice. Now you get victim points and you move up on the hierarchy if you're trans or non-binary, all these different
Mhm.
categorizations. And so you have this explosion of kids now saying that they're trans. You
Mhm.
have, especially in the neurodivergent communities, autistic kids, a lot of them are being sucked
Yes.
into this and saying,
Yes.
"I'm trans too." And so there's this explosion of it, and you see social justice activists and TRA using it as a weapon against people and calling people transphobic if they don't fall in line with all these expectations and
Yeah. Yeah.
allow kids to have surgeries and stuff. And so you've been saying that there are some very real fears about all this for
Oh yeah.
trans people like
Oh
yourself. And
yeah.
what are those?
Well, some of my main fears are people are just going to lump us all together and you're just going to be one of them.
Mm.
So the idea that's being built in people's head through the media, and the left is doing a good job of this on its own, is projecting trans people, LGBT people, as like groomers and child predators, and enforcing really inappropriate sexuality, like on children and in kids spaces and all of these things. And 10-15 years ago, it was bad enough. Like, most people, vast majority of people, had absolutely no idea what trans was, maybe a crossdresser or a drag queen or something. And then like what they did know is like, oh, they're probably like perverts or degenerates or molesters or sex workers or something. They're just like the scum of society, right? So we finally got to this like comfortable space till about like around gay marriage. And I think things were pretty good. But then once people started pushing all the orthodoxy, and especially on kids, pushing the transition on kids, it's causing a big backlash. And I think I'm afraid that people are just going to assume me to be a communist because I'm trans. And on your page, you had posted something about kids transitioning. And I said something about, this is very unfortunate, and it's such a nightmare situation because people like me will be lumped in with all of these
Yeah.
people, and I don't support any of these things. And someone on the page was like, well, what's a nightmare is you and your community, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I missed that.
And he went on a
Oh.
huge, long diatribe and this and that. And I was just like, thank you, sir, because you very generously had
Illustrated my
pointed
point.
out, yeah, my entire point is that you believe all of these different things, even stuff about like Trump. Like, I voted for Trump, I support this, I support that, the things that you support, but you aren't interested in how we think alike and how we can work
Yes.
together. You're just doing what I'm afraid of, which is automatically jumping to, oh, trans, communist.
That
So
that is so I'm sorry I missed that. I'm gonna go back and find it. What
I
an
think it was,
illustration of your point, though. That's exactly what you were saying.
yeah, it was like exactly what I was saying. And he tried to backpedal and stuff, but like I snapshotted like the text and stuff, and it was like, you and your community, because he was like, I wasn't talking about you. And I was like, you said like you and your community are a nightmare and this and that. And I'm like, dude, you know nothing about me. Like, we probably agree on so many levels.
Yeah.
And I don't even care. The thing is, like, I guess this is very libertarian of me or something. I don't know. I don't need people to believe like me. I don't want people to believe like me. I think Hinduism has helped me a lot with that whole pluralism thing. I don't have the time and energy to like make people think or believe like me. Like, it's just besides the point. So it's so exhausting when they try and,
You're above that, though. But see, that kind of person who's arguing with you in that way, I think they're missing that what they're trying to accuse you of is true for them. It is very important for that person that you believe like them and that you
yeah,
and
yeah.
so but they see it in you because it's in them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um I'm kind of similar. I just don't I don't I'm like something you said earlier that really resonated with me. Don't tell me what to do. Don't try to control
Yeah,
me. Let me make my own decisions.
yeah.
I'm a
And
free,
that's,
independent human being,
yeah. And I'm,
capable.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can totally understand and I support waiting on like surgery, especially for transition and kids and stuff. But like what I'm really worried about as well is that states are just going to be like, there are no such thing as trans people, and we will not allow
The
you to be on
backlash.
hormones. And there, yeah, because right now I kind of see like the conservative right as like a sleeping really fat dragon that's got like way out of shape and so lazy now. And over the last 10 years, it's become so watered down, so watered down, so watered down. Like, when I think of Republicans and conservatives when I was a kid, like I said, I grew up in a very evangelical, very fundamentalist environment. So when I compare over time, this great scary dragon is just like this really obese, lazy, like thing of its past self. But even though it's a sleeping fat dragon, if you poke it enough, you're going to wake it up and it can still bite your head off, you know?
Mm.
So that's kind of how I see it. It's like we had really nice things for a while, LGBTs. Like, you keep pushing. It's not that the Republicans are evil and they're trying to do all of these things. Like, it's not like they have an agenda against trans people. All they do is just react to the over corrections that the left is trying to push.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm really afraid, like, what if I can't get my hormones? Like, what if I can't get, yeah, something I need for trans related care, because I moved all the way across the country when I was 19. I left Florida to go live in California so I could receive trans care, because there was only one person at the time in the state that I knew of, 2 hours away, and you had to pay $175 for the first phone consult before he would even see you in person. So it was just like such a difficult, expensive,
And
like
now it's
real
on every
process.
corner.
And now, oh my God, I couldn't believe I went to, since we moved from Oregon to Pennsylvania, I had to get a new doctor for trans related care. And there's a trans clinic, LGBT clinic. So they do like trans stuff and like STD testing and things like that. And I was like, I don't know, this is probably going to be a really woke place, but I have to get my meds. Oh my God. Even in that clinic, they were asking me what I wanted my hormone levels to be. And I'm like, that's dangerous and inappropriate. Like,
Wow.
You need to tell me if my levels are in the correct, safe place, not like if I want more or if I want less. But that's going into the more of body modification and non-binary movement, I think, because now we're seeing all sort of stuff that never had to do with trans, like people half transitioning or non-binary surgery that's not fully a penis or a vagina, but like a mix, like,
And where they take the nipples off and don't replace
yeah,
them.
like there's a whole
Yeah.
new like in between element that's going on now. I don't know why you went
There's
on that
also
route,
that,
but
well, that's a part of, I got to interview this therapist a while back who's brilliant, Jake Wiskerson. He talked about how within therapy, they're now pushing this validation thing.
affirmative therapy.
Affirmative
Yes.
therapy.
This
Not
is
just,
terrible. Yeah.
yes, not just with gender, even not just with the
anything.
identity, anything, right?
Fatness, mental self-identification with mental illness. So DID, autism is the biggest one, probably ADHD, depression, just self-diagnosis, right? And it very well may be that you have some, autistic tendencies there, and like I want people to be able to receive whatever resources they want. But I think why people jump on the trans and the mental issue train is because those are the easiest things to change, to alter your identity, which will raise you up in the victim hierarchy, right? So the gender things, it's accepted now that you can change that and move up. Transracialism is still on the fringe. That's for the most part not accepted. So you can't change your race, right? Yet, anyways, as far as we know, we've seen a couple of crazy people.
Yeah, but they. I know that they're kicking those people out right now and saying,
yes,
no, you can't do that. Rachel Dolezal. But eventually, this ideology will have to accept that, because that's going to start to happen more and more often. Yeah. Because these young kids that they're raising on all this Marxism and postmodernism and everything is relative. There's no truth. There's no biological truth. Yeah, they're going to be purists, and they're going to say, well, if I can do that with my sex, why can't I do it with my race? And that's going to,
because I think, everything is a social construct, then everything can be socially deconstructed and then reconstructed however I want. Yeah. And exactly. That's why I tell these teachers, they're going to be reaping a lot of bad karma, because if you look at the Cultural Revolution, you had years of radicalizing the youth, and who were some of the worst people that were literally torn apart alive, like eaten alive, literally eaten alive. The teachers, the professors.
Wow.
Yeah. The students who had been so radicalized into this purity spiral, I was reading about the flesh parties of Guangxi province, where they literally took professors and ripped them open alive and would eat their organs, like to prove their hatred of the rightist capitalist roaders and the bourgeoisie and all of these things. And we think the last few years have been bad with everything being labeled racist, like toothpaste, racist, hiking, racist, like everything was racist. Same thing in China happened. Everything was labeled bourgeois. Having grass, bourgeois. Eating fresh fruits and vegetables, bourgeois. Having good hygiene and brushing your teeth too much, bourgeois. Pregnant women taking off time was actually considered bourgeois. So you had to literally give birth in the Maoist philosophy, and as soon as you gave birth, you had to get back in the field and commit to the revolution. So the revolution and commitment to Mao is above everything. So the kids that are being radicalized right now. Like all of these teachers and professors thinks they're great, but like their kids are going to come up with a new term for turf, and they're going to be the new turfs
Yes.
or the new fascists,
And if you don't toe the
because they're not
line,
pure enough. Yeah, and they're going to be eaten alive.
they're
In some
already.
instances, they literally were. You know.
Did you see
Yeah.
them the past 2 days? I just saw this last night. I was late to
Mm.
sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm actually not online, believe it or not. Yeah, and I missed these news items until later. Bette Midler and Macy Gray are both under
Yeah.
fire right now from
Mm.
their own sort of leftist echo chamber
Yep.
for making statements of fact, of biological fact about
Yeah.
how you can't actually become a woman even if
Yeah.
you have surgery. It's not that it's, you're and Macy Gray, I think, said, I know lots of trans people. If you want me to, use your pronoun, I will, but you didn't become a woman because of
Yeah.
surgery. It's just a biological fact. And yet
Yeah.
they're both being mobbed right now by
Yeah.
their own
And I mean,
communities.
trans people can't even say that there's a biological difference, but it's like Blair White and Buck Angel have said this before. Like, if I can't talk about my own biological differences, then why did I transition? There would be no
Yeah.
reason for trans
Yes.
people to exist. Like, why did I do all of this? Like, years of blood, sweat, and tears, and thousands of dollars, and you know,
Yeah.
all of these things. It's not just, yeah. I'm fighting against the patriarchy and just deconstructing these social constructs. It's
Yeah.
not what it's about.
So, Hyla, I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
Mm.
I know that you do a podcast as well. You have a YouTube channel. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. Thank you for asking. I totally forgot. So I just have my own YouTube channel. I don't have a ton of videos up there, but I do have my own channel. It's called Sahila Devi, Suhaila Devi, Sahila Devi, and I talk about so many things. There's like Hindu chanting videos, videos about Indian history and gods and goddesses and spiritual topics. There's I did a video on my walkaway story. So if you want to know about how I left the left, I have a video on the transgender umbrella, or transgender as an umbrella term, and how that harms like actual transsexual people. So if you're interested, check out my channel.
And you guys can find that link down below.
Yeah. And I'm also a friend of Carrie Smith on Facebook. If anybody wants to, you can reach me through email, which I'll give to Carrie Smith, but my email or my Facebook, you can reach me through those means. So if you have any questions, especially about Vedic counseling or spiritual counseling or having a Hindu ritual done for you, or if you want to talk to me and have me on your channel, then please reach out.
I have to ask you one more question. In the back, did you make those flower arrangements?
No, they're
Oh,
actually
okay. What are
they're
they?
little orchids.
Oh, yeah, they are orchids.
How do I?
Beautiful.
Oh, there you
Because
go.
I know you make very beautiful flower arrangements.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I post those pictures on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah, these actually came from work. I in addition to what I do with Vedic counseling and stuff, I work at a retirement home in activities. And these came from the retirement home. Trader Joe's is very nice, and they donate every week all their flowers that they don't sell to us. So we get buckets and buckets of orchids and roses and so many flowers every week. So I have orchids like all over the house that we got for free from Trader Joe's.
How
And they're
nice.
perfect. I don't know
Yeah.
why they had to sell them. They were like $30 and looks good to me.
Yeah. That's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, Sahila, thank you so much for being here with us
Yeah.
today. You guys go check out our channel. It's down below. Thank you for watching. If you like the
Yeah.
video, consider hitting like. And I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, listeners. Bye.
Bye-bye.